In the not-too-distant future, a revolution is brewing, one that will change the very fabric of our existence. It's a tale of cells that hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of life itself. Let us venture into the unknown, for in this age of stem cells, anything is possible.
I've seen some beautiful...
Speaking of hot topic these days, July 1st, 2025, Florida passed the big stem cell bill, and we're going to unpack that today. Yep. All right. So, Jan, what is the, and you and I have to really commit to this. We're not allowed to chime in our own opinions until we get through this law.
Deal.
Let's unpack the law, and then we can give our 2, 3, 5 cents regarding this topic. Deal?
I love it.
All right.
We do have opinions, so stay tuned. Stay tuned until the end.
Let's do the YouTube thing where you must continue watching to hear what we think about all this.
Hit subscribe.
That's good. We never do that. We have to do that often.
We don't.
And if you are interested in supporting the field of stem cell research, you just simply pressing the subscribe button helps us greatly. Helps us increase our visibility to people that need this information and ultimately help grow the community. So thank you for your support.
And in all seriousness, we have been very encouraged by the number of people who have been commenting lately, as well as how late in the episodes the comments are coming from. So thank you for watching, and thank you for staying with us. And as promised, on this topic, opinions will come at the end. So stay tuned.
All right, here we go.
But first, let's talk about what it is. What is this stem cell law? What does it provide for?
All right, the first thing, physicians, so licensed medical doctors, MDs, and osteopathic doctors, DOs in Florida, are now allowed to offer stem cell treatments not yet approved by US FDA, okay? But only for orthopedics, wound care, or pain management. Okay, I'm not allowed to say anything.
It's really hard, isn't it?
Okay, so we're limited to those three scenarios, okay? But the bottom line is that physicians in Florida are free to inject non-FDA-approved stem cell products for these conditions. Okay.
Not all stem cell products.
Okay, so this is about sourcing.
So what kinds?
Yeah. So the kinds that are allowed are very specific. They have to originate from after-birth related tissues like placentas or discarded umbilical cords after live births. Okay, so nothing else is allowed. So no fetal, embryonic cells, and not even cells that come from your own body. They have to come from an after-birth related tissue. All right. Okay, we're not going to comment on.
Stay tuned for the opinions.
Don't comment. Okay. In addition, the facilities do have to be FDA registered and regulated. They have to be accredited. They have to be GMP facilities, which are current good manufacturing practices, that they're compliant with that. And they have to also provide post-thaw viability reports before treatment. Okay, so we'll get into that as well. Okay, what else?
There's a mandatory informed consent requirement. Physicians must provide written informed consent that clearly, in very plain language, articulates the experimental nature of the therapeutic and the therapy, and there is specific verbiage for clear legal notice. And Florida has also decided to treat infringement of any of these new laws as something that's eligible for criminal penalty.
But only if you do the forbidden, which is to use fetal or embryonic tissue. If you do that, you're in big trouble. Okay. So it's quite the law. I don't think I think Florida really does take the cake. They're the first to actually put this sort of thing in writing. It's surprising to see like a source listed, right? Particular source for a stem cell, because I assume their scientific or medical groups got together and somehow determined that these are the right sources for which stem cells should come from. But you know, the law that they created is actually not far from the Texas law. Texas also has a stem cell law. Now, it's not the reason why Hope Bio is here, but let's quickly, I think it would be helpful to quickly go over the Texas stem cell law, and then we can maybe compare them.
Yes, I think it's helpful in placing the Florida laws in context. There are a lot of people out there who may never have really thought about regulation and stem cell laws at the state level prior to hearing about Florida, and so they may not know what's happening and what has been happening in Texas. And they may also be unaware of what a true hotbed of innovation is, a cliche term that we see, but it's true. Texas is, and regulatory laws are part of it. So, I mean, our history in Texas with regulation of novel therapeutics that perhaps is more state-specific, although still in alignment with federal regulation, goes back to 2017 with Charlie's Law.
So in Charlie's Law, it's HB 810. It essentially allowed the use of investigational adult stem cell treatments for patients with severe chronic or terminal illnesses. Now, the Texas Medical Board, I think, had come up with a list of conditions that would meet that criteria, but it's important that it was either severe chronic or terminal. And the physicians also had to determine that the patients had already exhausted all available treatments, FDA-approved treatments, and that's why they needed to access this. Yeah. So the Texas law actually does say that there is a specific treatment type. Okay, so just like the Florida law that says that it's placenta derived or umbilical cord or cord blood, the Texas law actually required that the investigational therapies were adult stem cell based. This is actually the first adult stem cell law. Actually, Utah also passed one, but in Texas, it's limited to adult stem cell therapies that are not yet FDA approved. Yeah.
Yeah, and so right away we see a couple differences. I mean, it's opens the door to a wider array of cellular therapeutics, while still, like the Florida law, avoiding the ethical issues that really inhibit access to fetal or embryonic tissues. Apart from scientific rationale, it's that the ethical issues are so robust. Does it really increase access? Probably not, right, to allow those types of tissues. But what we also see here is a difference. The Florida law is really limited to types of impairments, but with no stipulation about severity. Whereas the Texas law is thinking about patients who might be considered in most dire or extreme need with a much wider lens about consideration of what that need might be.
Mm-hmm. In Florida, it's interesting to note that the products that are allowed have to be not FDA approved at all. In Texas, they still require that the investigational products be under development. So they had to have been have to have an IND with FDA, an investigational new drug application, and going through the actual development. So going through clinical trials. The first stage in the clinical trial process is phase 1, which is safety. So that's a good thing, right? If you are studying the safety of your product, at least there's some level of oversight there, because to do a clinical trial to determine safety is not a small task. So that is a box that they checked off there. And what else, Jan?
Well,
IRB. What's
it's
IRB?
If we could go back to that for just a minute. I mean, it's
Yeah.
worth noting that in regenerative medicine and investigational products across the board, a lot can be discovered during those phase 1 safety trials and research that perhaps would be harmful. I mean, there are reasons that phase of research exists, right? It's to discover exactly that, safety. And so when you look at laws like Florida's that take that off the table, that's worth talking about when we get to the opinions.
That is a good point. Yeah. Yeah, because all of this is to increase accessibility to safe products, right? Safe, innovative products. That's the whole point. And I think that's what the legislators' legislators' intent is, are. I'm grammatically messed up right now. Okay, so IRB. So an institutional review board, IRB, is a third-party oversight group. They have nothing to do with the actual conduct of the study, but they are responsible for overseeing the safety. So if there is an adverse, like a serious adverse reaction that happens, then everyone has to meet to discuss that and also determine whether the trial is fit to continue or it should stop or what. So these are all like guardrails that we put in place when we do research. IRB requirement in the Florida law is not required. Now, naturally so, because IRB oversight is typical for clinical trials. So because Florida's law is not, when a physician is giving treatment to a patient, it's not under a trial context. Therefore, there would be no IRB oversight in that situation. In Texas, IRB oversight is required. So definitely would still need that. Let's talk about tissue sources.
The bottom line is that the Florida law limits access to stem cells that come from afterbirth tissues, which could be placenta, the umbilical cord blood. Whereas the Texas law simply says adult stem cells, which could include from adipose tissue or bone marrow, in addition to these other sources. There's no explicit ban on fetal or embryonic sources in Texas, but federal law does apply, and there are certain restrictions at the federal level to those types of tissues.
You were talking about embryonic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So embryonic generally across the board is not allowed, at least under these state laws. But it is interesting, again, that one state goes for one source and another state goes for another source. So is the source important? Is that the determining factor when you're trying to determine whether these products work or don't work, or whether they are safe or not safe? Do they play a role in that? I don't know. We're not allowed to talk about it. We're just asking questions. Okay.
It's so hard.
Okay, number 4, facility and product requirements. So the Florida and Texas require GMP production. So those are pretty much the same. So you're making products in hopefully reputable places. GMP regulations for tissue processing, or in this case, tissue processing for afterbirth tissues, or whether you are processing cells from adult tissues. If you're following GMP regulations, there are a lot of things and a lot of steps that you have to do. Again, all to ensure that what is generated is safe. It is important to note, though, that a company that says that they are manufacturing under CGMP conditions does not necessarily mean that they are. Okay, those are two different things. They think they are, but how many times do we see FDA going into a facility that's supposed to be GMP, who says that they are, but they find a laundry list of violations. This is when you see people getting warning letters, which happens all the time in this space. And so, again, it doesn't certify that it is GMP compliant by saying that you're GMP compliant, but in Florida's law, they actually included the accreditation, that they wanted a third party to accredit that GMP regulations and their regulations are being followed. So that's another level of oversight. Yeah. Okay. So Jan, do either law talk about like how much money someone can charge for these treatments?
No, neither the Florida nor the Texas laws include explicit provisions related to costs, costs that might be borne by patients and what could be considered a consumer protection angle.
So you're saying doctors can charge whatever they want?
Under these laws, yes, they can.
In Florida, they will require a disclaimer. But aside from that, there are no real protections, other protections that are built in, meaning financial recourse or any of that is not on the table. I guess if you sign the informed consent, that's the end of it.
So now that we've laid out these new laws, we've talked a little bit about how they compare to the laws here in Texas. Is Hope moving to Florida?
That's the $1 million question. Is Hope moving to Florida based on Florida's new stem cell law? Keep listening. I'll let you know. So let's unpack all of this. Okay, so we've got these two laws. I know we're focused on the Florida law, but all in all, differences, similarities aside, do these types of laws on a state level, do they increase, again, the intent of the laws, which we are assuming increasing accessibility to safe and innovative stem cell related products? Is it accomplishing its task?
Most physicians, or many, I don't want to misqualify here, we see many physicians already doing the things that are provided for here in these laws.
Yeah, I do agree that the products that patients generally have access to today are the types of products that are provisioned within these two laws. So it's already happening. It's just happening under the radar or illegally, and illegally, right? But under this new framework, now there is an avenue for them to do it legally. So what happens to the manufacturers that are making these products if they're able to supply these to physicians who are legally able to administer them? Then they can sell their products essentially on the market right now. I wonder if it would impair or delay the development of these products. For instance, if you have created a placenta-derived stem cell product that works really well, and we do this. We bank cells from the placenta, and I would assume it would qualify under this Florida law. If we do this, I wonder if it would impact the development of this product, because you don't have to go through FDA stages anymore to get your product into market. Florida itself is a huge market. Last time I checked, there's lots of retirees there. A lot of people who I consider to be vulnerable populations that are looking for anything to make them feel better. The argument I see a lot in the stem cell space is, oh, but it's safe. It's safe. It should be allowed. It's safe. Yes. But if doctors have no restrictions on what they can charge, and they're charging enormous amounts of money, enormous. Jan, how many times do we see products being sold that are just, these sorts of cells that have been isolated from birth tissues or whatever, stuck in a freezer? How much they cost? Thousands and thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars per treatment. The harm is financial harm. There is a lot of people being taken advantage of and taken on a ride. And so if what you're selling is actually not efficacious, then there is a problem, right? Because, again, lack of consumer protection becomes the issue. Yeah.
It's a huge problem. And, again, I want to acknowledge my foundational philosophical belief, which is that the efficacy of cell therapy is inherently in volume, sustained administration of high volume of cells.
And that's what we have seen. That's what we have observed, and that's why we're confident in saying that. Yeah.
Well, and so it creates a very dangerous consumer environment, I believe, when you make available at a high price tag to vulnerable populations who are desperate for relief, from something, even if we limit it to these conditions like pain, like chronic pain.
Yeah.
If you can afford one treatment, but the data in FDA clinical trials points to a need for more for any true change in your condition, can I ethically sell you at a very high price point a single treatment without telling you that the data says you're probably going to need more?
Well, to that then, Jen, I would argue, wouldn't right to try laws, especially the federal right to try law, doesn't that essentially, aren't we talking about the same thing?
I think we're talking about very similar things.
Okay.
But I think the differences in application.
If Florida's law did require some level of, FDA clinical trials, then what difference would it be with the right to try? Right to try already allows physicians to take part. Maybe the individual medical boards didn't. And that I think we have to look up. And if any of you know the answer to this, please comment. Would love to know. Regulatory attorneys out there, love to know if a physician in a state is participating, if a physician in the United States is participating in the Right to Try program, and they access a product that fits or is available under Right to Try, and they treat a patient, could they still have a problem with their medical board? Do individual state medical boards have to allow physicians to participate in the federal right to try law?
I would love to know the answer to that question. That would be a really interesting conversation. The other thing I'd like to know more about is how the working groups or authorities in Florida came to the conclusion about appropriate tissue sourcing that they did, right? Because the cells that they're talking, a lot of these afterbirth products, right? These are adult stem cells, which are what's provided for in the Texas law. So why is sourcing from a placenta or an umbilical cord considered okay under Florida laws, but sourcing from adipose tissue or bone marrow is not?
So clearly there is some degree of scientific misunderstanding here. Mm-hmm. Okay. The very fact that you are limiting stem cells just by their source means that we're not really talking about the stem cells themselves, okay, and what qualifies a good product versus not. And it's not the source. We talk about this all the time in our other videos. Watch our What Are Stem Cells video if you would like to know the answer to this question. Source is often confused with the power of a cell or the potency of a cell. but it's a flawed concept because it's rarely related to source. It's more related to other things, processing, stem cell type, the actual identity and purity of a product. Most of the time has to do with that. Numbers, viability. Viability is a big one. And when I say that, and I say it with all due respect, because we talk to a lot of legislators, right, who have a lot of questions about cell therapies, and we really hope that we educate them in a fruitful way. But what we find time and time again is they mean well. I think all in all, again, increasing accessibility for their constituents is the primary goal. There's a lot of people out there that need help and they want access to innovative products, and so they go at it to go fight for change. So I'm all about that. I think there's a lot of changes that need to occur, maybe some on the federal level and FDA level, regulatory-wise, and state, but change is good. Now, we have to make sure we know what we're changing. For instance, going back to the science, and this is where science is it's complicated, but it's very important that we go through this and dissect this so that we can make better decisions, better laws. So, viability. In the Florida law, there is a very interesting requirement that requires post-thaw viability data, a report. It says post-thaw viability report. Now, if you are a doctor in your doctor's office about to administer a product, you have gone to the freezer, okay? The fact that it says post-thaw means that it is frozen, right? Because otherwise, how are you going to have post-thaw data if you're not thawing the product, okay? So that means the product is frozen. So the doctor is going to go to, I don't know where, to go get this frozen product. And when they take it out, they're going to thaw it, and chances are they're going to give it to you, administer it to you right away. Put it into a syringe and administer it. Okay. If the physician, and physicians should be aware of this, that when you take a product and you put it directly into a patient, you're not measuring the viability post-thaw. Well, you can't. Unless you have a GMP lab in your doctor's office, nobody is measuring viability, post-thaw viability. So when is this being measured? If it's required in this treatment, or at least in this law, when is that viability actually being measured? It's probably done in a validation setting. So what that means is you're going to mimic this before you actually make your product available, that you have tested this. So the manufacturer is going to test this by saying, we're going to take 3 lots, and typically 3 lots, and we're going to freeze it, and we're going to thaw it just as a doctor would, and here's your report. Okay. Now, just a word about viability. Okay. Viability is the percentage of cells that are alive in that product. Okay. Frozen cells can have a huge range of viability. You're talking about anywhere from 10% to 99%. That's your range. You can freeze 10 vials exactly the same way, hoping for the best, and afterwards you measure viability of all 10 of these, and they're all different. Okay. That is your level of fluctuation, and that is also the level of fluctuation you would see in clinic, meaning you don't know. So physicians, when a salesperson tells you that our viability post-thaw is 90%, it means nothing, because unless that product is measured at the time of administration, you really don't know. And even if you feel confident, okay? These are reputable people and they tell me that it's 90%. You can be 90% viable and be 10% functional, okay? So that means your cells are half dead. Well, they're viable because viability is either viable or non-viable, so dead or alive, okay? But plenty of us know people who are alive but not functional. Would you agree with this?
Yes.
Right. So
absolutely.
that is what is happening. A lot of times you see frozen products that show a great viability but have no real functionality. And that is a tragedy to the patients that are paying all this money for these kinds of treatments. That's a reality.
Well, and we also have the variables of, okay, so if something is viability tested in a lab, how is it shipped? How is it handled once it got to the physician's office? What's the state of the freezing mechanism in the physician's office?
Well, let's talk about that for a second.
Yes.
Storing conditions. When you are freezing these cells, okay, there are different levels of freezing. Freezing in your freezer, in your home freezer, okay? You have freezing at -80. This is very typical. -80 freezers are pretty darn cold, okay? You keep those, and typically hospitals will have them. Some doctors' offices will have them, but -80 freezers are very expensive, and are particular type of equipment that you also need to make sure is always running at -80. But stem cells themselves, the way that we cryopreserve them and that we know are stable, because again, you have to do these studies that show stability over time. And we know that these cells have to be stored under liquid nitrogen in order to maintain a cold enough temperature to have good stability within your cell product. That is at least what we've identified in the cell populations that we work with. Okay. In clinic, do they have nitrogen tanks? Typically not. So if they are -80 or if they are regular freezers, how long have they been sitting in there? How long have they been? Because your viability, again, you are operating under viability post-thaw, which someone gave you a report on. If that's what you are trusting, then your storage condition may play a big role in what you are eventually giving the patient, right? What you're actually administering.
Well, and the bottom line is that you don't know what you're actually administering.
Yes, you don't.
And so if a patient asks that question, you can't honestly answer them. And I'm laughing as I'm hearing, this description. And I do want to point out that nothing that we're discussing here about the technicalities of freezing would be unknown to people working in the cell therapy space. This is very general, common baseline knowledge, which again begs the question, how were these particular nuances of these laws, who was part of this decision-making process, and how did they arrive at this conclusion? Because what we're describing is not revolutionary. Anybody working in this space knows these technicalities about freezing. But I was laughing because every parent knows, I think, the feeling of doing that back-to-school run to Costco or Sam's Club or wherever you go for your big groceries before the school year starts. And by the time you get it all home, especially at Texas, in Texas, it is still hot, though it is fall if you're a parent. If you had anything that was frozen, some of it's thawed, some of it's not, and you're going to chuck it all back in your freezer and hope that it's okay when you pull it out, whenever you pull it out, right? And that's a more perhaps a vibrant illustration. I mean, common sense tells you that it's not all going to freeze the same or travel the same or be the same. Cellular therapeutics are just like that. You don't actually know under this viability requirement what you're giving a patient.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it really is. And yeah. And through our experience so far with FDA, they do a great job asking all of these tough questions. They want all of this data. They want to know all this. One of the things that makes Hope Biosciences so different is that we are always delivering stem cells fresh. We are not delivering stem cells frozen, although something is coming soon. But So far, what we've been able to validate in our process is always fresh is best. That is for sure. Fresh is always best. You know exactly, you've measured exactly what your viability and your cell potency and all of that is before you're putting it into a patient. That is necessary. Really, when you're doing a clinical trial, you need to have that assurance. You know, most of us are running trials, and when I say most of us, I'm talking about the industry. We're running clinical trials without knowing what's going in the patient. We're like crossing our fingers, hoping they're getting a full dose, but we really don't know. And that uncertainty shows in the variability in clinical trial results. So, you know, giving patients a pure product of viable, healthy cells and ensuring that is a key to at least delivering something that you think is going to be helpful. You know, starting there. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that occurred to me too, as I'm taking all this in and really enjoying this, is that, you know, the Florida laws, there's a great demand talking about part of its accessibility, part of it's making open to people autonomy over their own care, giving them access to the therapies they want access to with appropriate oversight and safety always in mind. There's a great demand for autologous cell therapies, and limiting sources to after birth products as your source of stem cells really cuts off a lot of access to autologous cell therapies where people receive their own cells, because especially if you're talking about the demographics most likely to be dealing with pain management or orthopedics, they don't have placental cells banked from their own birth, by and large, you know?
Well, I don't necessarily know if the Florida law says that you can't use adult tissues. I don't know if there's a different provision for that, or maybe their laws are. Yes, we'll have to look that
We'll have
one
to find
up.
out. Lawyers,
Yes.
regulatory lawyers, please.
And I will Google that as soon as this is
Yes.
over. We will we'll come down to that because I think it is. I think it's not. I think this is just new on top of what is already
they
been
already
existing.
had.
Yeah, I think it's just building on top of that. And also the argument of using one's cells. Many doctors are already doing that, right? Like as we said, just because it's not in the law doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening all the time. People are taking bone marrow or fat out from somebody, spinning it down and giving it right back. That's already happening. So I don't think that there is a law against that per se. It's just there's not a law that strictly says that you can do it and you can charge money, and you're not gonna get in trouble for it. Yeah. So that's the difference. So, $1 million question.
Okay, so all that being said, and much more to be said as we continue to learn, are we going to Florida?
So is Hope Bio moving to Florida based on new Florida stem cell laws? The answer is no. No, why? One thing that's missing out of these laws, which we have, which, you know, I'm never shy to tell legislators, is that it misses the mark on manufacturers. It doesn't discuss the manufacturer's responsibility in all of this. Okay. If Hope Bio manufactured a product under any one of these laws, okay, the fact that we're in Texas, by the way, has nothing to do with the Texas stem cell law. It has nothing to do with that. The Texas stem cell law doesn't help us in any way, just to make that clear. Even though it's specifically for adult stem cells, it does not help us in any way. We release product in the United States under the federal regulatory laws that we abide by, okay? And it's very clear that the products that we make here are regulated investigational products. So they cannot be distributed on the market for any reason. Okay, so I can't give them to a doctor. I just can't hand them over. Under these laws, just because they say that they can administer them doesn't mean that I, as a manufacturer, can give them a product. Okay, so that's the thing. And even if they did put that in the law, FDA says no. So yes. I have no intention of going to jail, so I would not do that. Yeah, I I do not want to go to jail, and I am not suicidal. Those are for the record. Okay. Yeah.
Well, if we stay out of jail, we can do more podcasts.
So no, we're not going to be moving, and we're not going to be shipping product to Florida. Although we do, in the case of a clinical trial or under right to try, yes, we do ship product, but not under Florida's new law. How about the rules of interstate commerce? Many think that, say we set up shop in Florida and we make our product in Florida, and Florida physicians are the only ones that have access to our product, then we're safe because we're not participating in what they call interstate commerce. So long as we do everything within state, we should be fine. This is false. Okay, and I've been in this space long enough to know that no, they if you manufacture your product with components that are made from elsewhere, which everything is made everywhere, even equipment that you use to process your product, that will be considered interstate commerce. So it doesn't work. So there's really no loophole. We at Hope Biosciences are operating under federal regulations, and that's it. So we will remain in Texas.
Yay! Yay! We're thrilled to stay in Texas, which also means that the next episode of this podcast will be coming to you from Texas. So stay tuned, and look forward to much more to discuss next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.
No man's land.